So it's almost 2. I was up actually at a little bit before 7. So I've been fucking around for 7 hours. I had eggs, which took a little bit longer to make and eat than normal, but I mean, I think I've just been procrastinating. I think it's partly because I am afraid to walk in there. It was perfect last night, and I actually did. I didn't get to bed till around 2, and I all but finished 5 and 6, but I wanted to listen to them when I woke up just to be sure. Um, that's what I'm going to do right now. This is going to be intense flurry of activity for the next 10 to 12 hours um, of really pushing through these tracks. Um, and I think I will get through most of them. I'm going to find out around midnight, I guess, which will be the end of the day, what it is that the rest of the weekend will hold. But I'm hoping that I'm just about done when I get to that point. So it's about 10 minutes past, so it's about 2:30, and I am closing track number 5. One of the ways that I'm certain that I'm very close to getting a completely clean signal is that I'm getting a little bit of rattle in the left ear on the bass. Might sound counterintuitive, but I was getting a bit of a rattle on there initially, and it's back. I think the contact is out, basically. I don't know if that's because the driver's fucked or because the cord is fucked. Uh, but I do know it's pretty clear that, I mean, I need to buy. It might not actually fix the problem, but I need to buy a new cable, obviously. It's as clear as day now. So I will do that next week, along with when I get a new pair of headphones. But I'm closing track 5. It's a question of use value. The initial track was called useless, and I've changed it to was it the uh, use value was unclear in the human propensity towards creative art expression or something like that. It's meant to express the idea that what is useful and what is not useful is not always easy to determine. And hence, even if I felt like I was useless at the time, I may have um, been re- projecting implanted thoughts and reacting to it. Like I may have been internalizing kind of dominant social mores in ways that, in hindsight, seem less than ideal. A lot of the tracks have that kind of a twist to it. Maybe I should. Okay, so the first track was initially about terrorists. I was like, well, I was 15, and I was like, it was like drawn on like U2, and well, I guess what I understood about terrorists in 1996 was kind of a combination of, and this was in the 90s. You gotta remember that terrorism in the 90s was more of like a Christian thing, right? So it was a combination of like the Timothy McVeigh thing, and like the Unabomber, and the issues in Ireland. I mean, that's what before. I know there's an entire generation of kids that this is going to sound bizarre to, but before 9/11, when people talked about terrorism, they talked about Christians, and it was purely Christians that came up. Um, when people talked about terrorism in relation to the Middle East, it was usually about like attacks on synagogues. Um, I mean, I'm just trying to think of terrorist attacks from Muslims before the mid 90s. It's like, I guess they got Robert Kennedy, if you believe that. Do you believe that? I'm not sure I believe that. But like there were really like that whole like it wasn't there. Um, I mean, I guess the historical analysis is that it came out of the Mujahideen. Um, it was the Americans, working it all up to fight the Soviets in Afghanistan, right? And that was in the 80s. And it didn't start, like the 90s was this like transition period, and like there were a couple of bombings in Saudi Arabia or something. But it wouldn't have been until like Yugoslavia, Chechnya stuff started getting all mixed up in it, and all of a sudden you got these crazy people. I'm not sure I even believe that, right? When they killed Osama bin Laden, did they really kill someone, or did they just kill an idea? And all these sorts of things, right? It's never. I tend to try to stick as close to the official narrative as I can, or at least if I'm questioning the official narrative, I point that out, kind of thing, and I point out that I'm deducing things, and the actual reality is that as a regular pleb on the street out here, I don't have a fucking clue, and I realize I don't have a fucking clue. I know what I can read at various sources. I know that the official state documents are at the very least no more trustworthy than the stuff that I'm going to read on the internet. But at the same time, I also know that a lot of that stuff is coming from, like Russian propaganda, and it's just this kind of question of trying to piece things together. It's kind of more along the lines of that. If you're trying to understand this, what you've got. When you condense it down, you've got about 5 or 6 sources, and they're all equally untrustworthy. So you can't really trust any of them. There's a couple of sources that are a little bit more trustworthy. I'm talking about like Robert Fisk or Patrick Coburn, these kinds of independent journalists, and you broadly want to take your understanding of what's happening and put it in the context of the narrative that these independent journalists create, because they're the best source. They're not an ideal source. I'm not even sure I'd say they're a good source, but they are the best source, right? And then you've got, state propaganda coming from the States. You've got state propaganda coming from Russia. You've got state propaganda coming from Europe, which often, it rarely directly mirrors American propaganda, but it often reinforces it with its own sort of twist, right? And then you've got the stuff coming from Israel. And I said, what did I say, 5? I guess there's only like maybe like 3 and plus the independent journalists. So that's, if you count independent journalists as one source kind of thing. And I guess if I was to pick a 5th one, it's that you've got the conspiracy crew. And I think that you should listen to them. But it should be in the context of recognizing that they are no more trustworthy than any of the other sources, right? So you've got to take all these different ideas and piece them together, right? But I've gone off topic here. What I was getting at was that in the 90s, when people talked about terrorism, they meant Christians, like without the context never needed to be stated explicitly, because it was just obviously known that. There was an attack at the, I think, 96 Atlanta Olympics. There was like attacks on abortion clinics, and like I say, you had the Unabomber, you had the Oklahoma City, all this stuff. Actually, there was the World Trade Center bombing in '93 that I believe was understood to be from Muslim extremists, but it was. It was the exception. The norm when you saw a terrorist attack was that it was Christians. And I still, whenever I see, my initial reaction is, okay, this is some crazy skinhead. I'm more likely to make the error that it's like that skinhead in Norway than I am to make the error that it's a Muslim, because I automatically make that assumption, right? So it's 96, I'm 15, and I'm writing a song about terrorism, and it's like, the context that I'm putting it in is that context, plus like lyrics that I'd heard from like Bono talking about the situation in Ireland, and I think maybe a bit of Dexter Hollandish sarcasm. It's available on my Bandcamp site on the first demo. It very very childish analysis, which you would expect from a child. Um, so I've renamed that track to "Terrorism is used to restrict civil liberties," which is a little bit more of an update on how I would think of the topic today as an adult. Um, I think that whatever you think of the nature of the threat, I think that the way that governments have reacted is broadly unjustified. There's really no justification for large amounts of what the state has done. I don't care if there's people hanging out and around in airplanes. I mean, it's not. I don't. I have a hard time drawing that cause and effect relationship to say that there's someone that wants to harm the state, therefore everyone should. I don't like that. That's a cause and effect that doesn't add up to me. Um, and I think it's been used as an excuse in a lot of cases. I think in Canada, where all evidence suggested that the crazy person that attacked someone outside of Parliament Hill had nothing to do with any organized terrorist group, and there's all these laws being it was quite obviously just an excuse to pass things through, and it was so obvious that while the conspiracy theorists might not have any evidence, and while they should not be taken at face value, their argument is not unreasonable. It seemed like it was ready to go. Um, it's when you look at the entire picture, when you look at the big picture, you put it in context. What the conspiracy theorists are saying is no less ridiculous than what the government's saying, um, and should not be taken with any less seriousness. Whether it was orchestrated or not, it does seem obvious that it was used as a pretext, as an excuse to pass through things that they wanted to pass through anyways. And I think in a lot of cases already existed as standardization. But I mean, it's still the basic idea that that's how it's being presented by the government. That's how the media is picking it up. That the reason why we're having these draconian laws is because of this supposed threat, and therefore terrorism is used to restrict civil liberties. Um, the second track was initially it was I was tying together. Well, the initial track was called "Think," um, and it was very much a Russellian uh, secular humanist tract on the value of rational thinking to reject religious dogma. Um, I retitled it to "Aliens Are More Likely Than God," partly because it was. I mean, I drew on a couple of themes like that. There was a theme about uh, kind of an ironic communist um, inversion. Um, I actually think that, I mean, for a 15-year-old, those lyrics weren't so bad. I think that they actually were a little bit insightful. Certainly, for the first one, my perception of things has changed dramatically as I've become more educated. With this particular track, I think that as I've become more educated, it's more reinforced the way I was thinking at the time. Um, but nonetheless, I mean, they may be surprisingly precocious, but they still are definitely the words of a child. So, and I mean, just from a thematic perspective, I want all the lyrics out. But that's one that I might reconsider um, adding lyrics back to. I'm not sure yet. The third track was initially called Hey God, and it's been renamed to If God Somehow Exists, then it is sadistic and must be destroyed. It's kind of your typical, teenage rebellion, except my teenage rebellion was at the source of all existence. Hey, if we're going to rebel, let's rebel. Let's really get it going, right? Um, it was a sarcastic rant. My influences were on my sleeve very clearly at the time. Um, Again, my perspective has only hardened. I think that, if anything, what's happened is that, I mean, at the time I would have, I think I mentioned this once before. I'm not sure if it was on the vlog or if it was something I wrote somewhere. Well, I'm sure I've written it somewhere. I'm not sure if I mentioned it here, but I was very strongly affected by the Book of Job when I was a child. I actually took the time to read the fucking Bible. I picked it up, first page of Genesis, and I read the whole damn thing all the way up to the end of Revolution, or sorry, Revelations. There's an interesting Freudian slip. But it would, like, I mean, I, I think I was approaching it initially with a sense of curiosity rather than a sense of skepticism, because I wasn't really raised religious. I was just more like, okay, what is this religion thing? Like, let me look into this kind of thing. Um, and I knew enough already, even as a kid, to know that, okay, when I'm reading through Genesis, and I was like, I don't know, 9 or 10 or something. Even when I'm reading through Genesis, I know that, okay, I know the Earth wasn't created in 7 days. As a child, I knew the Earth was several billion years old. Um, and I knew the sort of typical educated Christian response of, it's an analogy. This day represents this amount of time and everything, right? So I was able to kind of get through that. But what really struck me reading through it was the cruelty. And sort of in the beginning, I mean, I was reading like a history book, right? There were these people named Israelites, and these are the things that happened to the Israelites, and they went through all of these things, and it was more just like, um, I mean, I don't want to say I was reading like literal history, like I was reading it the same way I would read like the Odyssey. I hadn't read the Odyssey by the age of 10, but I mean, I'd read enough things like that, to know how to read a book like that, right? And that's how I was reading it. It's like there was this ethnocultural group called the Jews, and this is their history, kind of thing, right? Maybe it's not completely accurate, but it's the culmination of their myths and founder status, right? And I mean, certainly the cruelty of it all struck me as pretty profound, but it didn't it didn't really strike me as reflective on the question of whether God exists or not. It struck me as more reflective on the culture that existed in the region at the time, which is maybe a little bit astute for a 10-year-old, but I mean, I was able to see that nonetheless, right? It was when the Book of Job came in that I mean, like, then at that point, okay, we're dealing with a God that's a real asshole. Why did bad things happen to good people? I don't know, but if it's because God likes to push your buttons and kick you around like you're an ant, then that's not something that I really wanted to be much a part of. Um, I know that that's a book. I mean, I know now that that's a book that a lot of religious scholars consider to be very, very profound, and to be, the um, it's sort of a deep expression of faith, and it's. My battery just went out with the wording again. I'm not sure exactly where I was. I know I was talking about the Book of Job, and I think I was talking about how religious scholars interpret the text as something that is a deep exploration of faith and all these sorts of things. And if you can get through this and really understand it, and you really understand the depth of faith, and I really see it the other way around. I think that if you can get through that and really understand it, and you still think that this whole Judeo-Christian thing is a good idea, then you're a fucking dipshit. If you or you're a tyrannical asshole. Because it's just if this is what you want to believe, and you're okay with this, then there's really something wrong with you on a psychological level. Like you would be the kind of person that likes to torture animals, kind of thing. I couldn't imagine any, especially if you look at the kind of New Testament concept of Christianity. I don't see how these things are at all consistent. And as much as there's aspects of the New Testament concept of Christianity that I do like the theological aspect of it is, it makes no sense with it accepting the Old Testament, right? I mean that's why they bundled them together. And why if I was teaching this stuff, you would need. I would argue that at Sunday school there should be no New Testament until you get to your level 5 or whatever. Like you need your Old Testament as the prereq kind of thing, because you couldn't understand it unless you understood the Old Testament. It's and I learned that at the age of 10 just by reading the stupid Bible, that you can't understand the New Testament unless you understand the Old Testament, because none of that stuff about messiahs and the whole the book of Revelations makes no sense unless you've read the Old Testament. So I was talking about the song, and this idea of God as a sadistic. At the time when I wrote the song, it was just teenage rebellion kind of thing, but it was rooted in something. I was certainly drawing on a lot of influences and trying to emulate something that I thought was worthwhile and all those kinds of things, but it was certainly also drawing from personal experience and how I had. Let me rephrase that. The reason those influences affected me as deeply as they did was because they were expressions of things that I would have felt, because they made sense to me due to the experiences that I'd had, right? And that's why emulating that seemed worthwhile to me. But the lyrics, whatever profound point I had did not come out well in the nature of the lyrics, because again, I was a child and they sound like the lyrics of a child. The fourth track has been renamed to There's Absolutely Something Wrong with Ironic Hipster Homophobia, or something along those lines. The original name of the track was There's Nothing, not that there's anything wrong with that. It was an ironic, a very sarcastic, it was an anti-gay song, presented in a way that was so sarcastic that it's actually hard to tell that it was an anti-gay song. It just comes off as a queer bashing tune. And all these years later, again, I realized that what I was trying to say, what I was trying to do was make queer bashing seem ridiculous, but it's not at all obvious. All that really comes across on on the surface value of the track is that it's a queer bashing track. And I'm uncomfortable with that, with myself, because for obvious reasons I'm not particularly fond of any cultural queer bashing exercises. So that's been renamed to make the purpose a little bit clearer, and the vocals, of course, as with all of them, have been completely removed. As I mentioned, the fifth track was about feeling as though I didn't have a place or a purpose. It was called Useless, and it's been changed to reflect a more subtle perspective on the idea of use in a capitalist society. Um, I might not argue that I'm not. I mean, I may agree that I'm not particularly useful in a strict kind of functional sense. But I would also argue that most people are completely useless. If you were to take those um, criteria and be really serious about them. Um, you know, people working in the service industry, um, a lot of the manufacturing sector, um, like I say, broad swaths of the population do nothing of any real value. So when you put it in context, is hanging out in my basement making music any less useful than working at the 7-Eleven? I mean, really, honestly, and I have to conclude that it probably isn't. So, it's this question of what is use value? Um, what does it mean to be useful? And is it even a worthwhile pursuit? Does it even matter? So the name of that track changed to reflect that. I'll go through with the different tracks and say what they mean as they go through. Right now I need to have my between track smoke. That was a longer rant than I meant it to be. That's fine. It means I have a vlog today. It didn't look like I was going to get much of anything. So um, I'm like I say, I was getting a little bit of a rattle in the bass, and that's definitely positive. So I'm plowing forward. So it was around 4:30. I closed track 6 a few minutes ago, but ended up doing some stuff on the internet for a few minutes that was necessary. Um, in fact, I should probably, when I close the lid, that was kind of the whole point. The track was initially called Skaters. I've changed it to Thug Culture is enforced from the top down. Um, enforced by the media from the top down. It was about trying to escape thug kids. Again, I was 16 when I wrote that one. The remix was, I don't know, 17. But it's kind of a weird thing in the 90s. People think I mean, I've talked to people that are older and people that are younger, and none of them get it because this whole skateboarding culture thing is generally attached to a set of ideals that I would normally be fairly gung ho about. I mean, there's a genre of music called skate punk that I'm actually a big fan of, but the 90s were weird because everything got flipped upside down. Um, and in the specific period that I grew up in, when I was that age, from I guess about 93 to 99, or, well, I was a little bit old by 99, from maybe 93 to 98, let's say. Skaters were thugs. They were the kids that listened to Slayer, had knives in their pockets, chains on their hands, and you wanted to avoid them because they would hurt you if you got too close to them. Um, and they would congregate in these sorts of gangs, and their boards were weapons. Um, I was able to mostly avoid it by being smart enough and aware enough to know, don't go near these people. But I mean, you would hear stories about um, skateboard gangs beating people over the head with their boards and stealing their shoes. Just that kind of, dumb kids thinking they can make money from petty criminal activity kind of thing, right? Um, I mean, they would push you around at school and stuff, intimidate you. It was, and to see, I don't really explore this in the song, but I remember when I was that age, like you would see the skateboard gangs intimidate the jocks. Like I say, it was all backwards in the 90s because everything got just completely flipped over. And they were the thuggish, macho, mean kids. Um, so I mean, that's what it's about. It's about. I mean, it's about feeling this kind of inability to defend yourself against what is a swarm of people that want to hurt you for no really good reason, or just want to benefit from stealing things that you own, um, and kind of realizing that like you're trash. You know, it's like, why do I have to? It's this kind of feeling of, why do I have to deal with you at all? You know, like life would be much easier if you just didn't exist. You know, it's not. I mean, I if we want to do this young to old thing, I mean, I'm a little older. I can come up with a better root cause analysis. And once again, as with the case with all of these, I think I was expressing a valid point, but I didn't articulate myself in a way that I can uphold because I was a kid. But the like the perspective that I was approaching it from the time was like I didn't want to come up with a root cause analysis. I didn't want to come up with solutions as to try to approach this. I just wanted to like can you not exist? It was just a feeling of like why are you here? Like just get out of my existence kind of thing. And that's what I was expressing in that track. Again, not as well as I wish it had, but the instrumental is um, I rather like it, and I've had some good feedback on it as well. But I mean, that's done, and I'm moving on to track 7, which is the Boogeyman song, the electronic remix of it. So it's almost 6 o'clock, and I'm glad that we're getting close to the solstice, so the days start getting a little bit longer. This is getting a little bit annoying. Another month and it goes away. Mostly, anyways. But the darkness. So it's 10 to 6, as I said, and I have completed the Boogeyman track. I also added a version of Skaters to the Drum Machine remix project, which is all just the electronic versions of these tracks. So it's the tracks, but I'm removing the guitars and bass, and sometimes shortening them or just focusing on a specific section or something like that. The Boogeyman track was this goes way back. This was. I mean, the initial version of it was on my first demo when I was 15, but the song is older than that. It's more like when I was like 13. And it's just a song about being afraid of the boogeyman. I'm not really going to go into this. I mean, the vocals are taken out for obvious reasons. But this one, because I think it's because I was so young. It has sort of actually a precocious sort of quality to it. I ruined it when I redid it. The initial 96 version of it is kind of cute in a way, but the version I redid in 98, I was trying to make it sound like weird and gothic or something, and it sounds stupid. But I mean the music is actually quite nice. It's an interesting little psychedelic rock song with all kinds of weird sounds in it. There's an electronic version of that as well. So there's an electronic version of the first track, the terrorist one of this third track. The God doesn't exist, and if it did, we should destroy it one. The sixth track, which was Skaters, which I just added, and the seventh track, Boogeyman, which was already there. So the next thing I'm moving over to is the track that I put the feature up for. I guess it would have been yesterday. Jeez, time time is such a weird thing. It like dilates and like sometimes that feels like it was last week, but it was like 36 hours ago. Um, Meanwhile, sometimes like days will go by and you won't even notice. I think a lot of it has to do with like how long you're awake for. When I have these long days like this, time seems to go longer, and I actually prefer that. Um, you only get so much time to live. You might as well make it stretch it out as much as you can, kind of thing. Um, and anyways, so I'm moving on to the next track, which is the one I featured from yesterday, without the vocals. Um, I know that this one I'm gonna have to play with a little bit more. I don't think I'm gonna alter it, but I know that the version that exists on the hard drive is slightly different than the version that's outputted. So um, I don't know if I'm gonna have to render a few of these tracks. It goes back to that weird EQ shit again. I know I had initially rendered it, and see. Here's the thing: is I remember it nulling. So that's the funny thing. I think that the initial upload from July 5th. See, and it was this track that actually tipped me off that something's wrong. Because I noticed that it was sounding differently and at different levels and everything. This is the one that set me on this hellish ride through who knows what is causing this or that, or it was noticing that this one sounded different. So, and it was the first one that I replaced. I didn't save the original version, but I'm pretty sure, if I remember correctly, it nulled. Anyways, and I remember just thinking that whatever I was thinking, I remember it not making sense. I remember thinking that what I was thinking didn't make sense. So, but going with it anyways. I'll do that from time to time. Thinking that maybe it was just like a bad render, but it was nulling because it was mathematically the same, and the file was fucked because it sounded better. Like I said, this was before I realized really what was wrong. But I do remember it nulling, so I think it's the same as it initially was. But I must have reopened it before I rendered it the first time, meaning that if I reset the EQs, I get something different. I have every reason to think that what I've got is what I want, but I need to play around with it a little bit. This is the first one like that. I'm also going to question. I may do an electronic version of this as well. And on top of that, I may actually do a vocal version, and that's actually a good way to check because I don't think I re-rendered the vocal version. I think the vocal version is still from July 5th, whereas the version I have is July 12th. So that's a good way to check that actually. And I am off to have my cigarette and get back to that. So it's close to 8, and I finished track 8 about a half an hour ago. That track is called Why, although I've retitled it too. I still don't entirely understand this, because I don't. It was a track. I was taking a sarcastic first-person perspective of a political, of a politician, and kind of speaking in monotone to create the impression that I'm brainwashing the listener. It's kind of typical, cheeky political. I don't want to use the word agitprop, but it's leaning that way. It's kind of like a beatbox kind of thing. This is one of the ones that I'm more likely to actually put vocals in. I took a look at the other one, and it's now that one's not coming up that way. But this one may actually end up that way. I don't know what I want to do with that yet. It's really going to depend on how much material I end up getting out. If it fits on the remix record, that's probably the best place to put it. I may just end up tacking it onto this as a download only. Or I may end up putting it as a B-side on some of the single. Or if it ends up that way, they just may end up all as singles. So I'm not sure yet. I'm just finishing them and putting them aside. There is a vocal version that is mixed and finished, although it's not uploaded anywhere yet. I am still getting a little bit of single tonight. I'm just going to conclude that it's Friday night. Because it's Friday night, there's more electricity running because it's higher peak usage. It's also colder than it's been in a while, so that might be increasing electrical usage. I think that that's increasing the magnetic field, which is creating more radio signals. Or it could be that it's Friday night, therefore there's more signal in the air. Whatever it is, I'm just gonna avoid it. There are some other things I could do. I ended up skipping a day of eating. I had eggs this morning. Eggs are normally a Thursday thing. It's Friday, so I may end up eating twice a day, which is rare. Or I may dip into my Christmas gift. I'm gonna. Well, I need to do a couple of things before I can think about that. So that's my thinking for right now. Is I'm gonna stop for a few hours, come back to it after midnight, and hopefully the signal is retreated by then. So it's a little after 11, and I did get into the Christmas present. That's fine. I had a few hours, and now I need to get something to eat, and get another try at this to see if the noises come down a little. The other thing is I turned my modem on. I had my modem off for quite a while before, so I'm going to leave it off. Well, I'm going to leave the modem on at first, and if it's still a little noisy, I'm going to try and turn the modem off, see if I can get some cause and effect with that.